Hi, and welcome to The Lowdown with me, Nick Cohen. This week I want to talk about a big question, and to my mind, a really alarming question for our time. And the question is the Western centre left, I mean, everyone from Labour, moderate, centrist politicians, maybe even some on the centre right, through to the radical left, ought to have a great defining mission, ought to have a single purpose in stopping the radical right, in stopping Trump, in stopping Farage, in stopping Le Pen, in stopping Alliance for Deutschland, stopping Putin, their friend. And yet it's failing to do it. It doesn't seem to be even able to acknowledge that it has that task. Sure, you can hear them every day. Just go on the internet. People pump their chests and bang their fists on the table and tell you how much they hate Trump and this is all fascism and what have you, but they don't behave like they mean it. They really don't. They don't unite, and crucially, they do not develop a program that can stop their enemies in their tracks. Let me give you two examples and then show how a discussion on this might go. In America, in what historians may well see as an epoch-defining failure, the Democrats could not stop Trump returning to power. Now, you can, as in everything in history, you can blame contingent circumstances or you can blame great sweeping forces. At the local level, you can blame Joe Biden. The monstrous vanity of an old man, typical old men are very vain people, who thought he could cling on to power, thought he could serve a second time when he could not, clung on so long the Democrats did not have time to find a replacement who could beat Trump. So you can just say that. Or you can say there are huge numbers of people in the United States and indeed in Europe who have just had it with old liberal democratic politics, hate the woke, hate migrants, hate it all so much they will vote for a criminal. Okay. America, it's very easy for people in Britain to blame America. It appeals to people who like slagging off all the cowboys in the West. What about Britain? In Britain, we've got a centre-left government under Keir Starmer with a massive majority, a majority you can see from space, and yet it seems wholly unable to provide an alternative to this country. You can blame Keir Starmer, as I just blamed Joe Biden, but also you can say, well, perhaps the centre-left is incapable of doing that. Meanwhile, not in America, but in Britain, Scandinavia, France, Germany, any European country, and rather bizarrely, Britain after Brexit has become ever so European, the centre-left vote is fragmenting into Greens and socialists, and they hate and target the old centre-left parties, whether it's Labour or the socialists in France or the Social Democrats in Germany. They're absolutely targeted by new forces on the green-red left. Now, again, you can just blame them. You can do as I would say, in the 1930s, the communists, the far left off their day on Stalin's orders, fought Germany's socialists far harder than they fought Adolf Hitler. Then Hitler came to power and they learned to regret their decision. But again, perhaps these appeals to history are unavailing. They could be. People could just say, look, I believe in green politics. I don't believe in a bloody Labour Party. I don't believe in Keir Starmer, and I'm right not to. Why should I vote for him? I don't have a great many answers, but I hope we can start a bit of a discussion here. And to help me, I'm joined by Rafael Behr. I'm sure you know him. He's political columnist for The Guardian. He's the author of one of the best books on Britain in the 2010s, I've read anyway, called Politics: The Survivor's Guide. And he's with us now. Rafael, welcome to the Lowdown.
Thank you. Hi, Nick.
Did you agree with my miserablest opening?
Sadly, yes. And I'm glad you went straight in hard to the Third Reich analogy, because we can never really avoid it in these sorts of conversations, but it always feels like a bit of a cop-out. But I do think you really touched on something there with that problem going back historically to tension between sort of orthodox Marxist-infused socialist left and the constitutional, more liberal centre-left, or in the German case, in the Weimar case, social democrats.
Raf, sorry to interrupt. So sorry. I think if you could just explain to listeners and viewers what actually happened in Germany in 1932 and 33, it might be a bit of a help.
I'd rather not, because I'm getting historically wrong. But I mean, I thought you put it pretty well. Essentially, that you had the Weimar Constitution mandated a sort of democratic parliament, but there were all sorts of reasons why that constitution wasn't very effective. And you had essentially a kind of social democrats trying to hold the republic together, while the radical left was complicit with the more radical forces on the right in terms of undermining the authority of
and attacking the socialists. And just as today, I mean, I was very struck by, no one noticed this, the Runcorn by-election a few months ago, where the Farage's candidate just beat Labour. And the majority was very small, but there were enough Green voters in Runcorn. You wouldn't have thought there were very many Green voters there, but there were, and they would rather vote Green than vote Labour.
Right, and this is exactly this comes at the problem from an interesting angle. And I don't want to engage in easy middle-aged centrist dad radical left bashing. I think plenty of people have probably seen me do enough of that in the past and have me do that, and it's frankly quite boring. But also, I think it's important to understand why it is now that so many people will think, I do not want to get my hands dirty by voting for this awful Keir Starmer Labour Party. If I believe in radical green politics or radical socialist politics, why can't I just vote for the party that's offering me that? Stop telling me, Labour people, I just need to just sort of suck my thumb and hold my nose and vote for a party I don't like, because that's the only alternative. And it's very important to put the conversation. I'm very keen to have a broader conversation on how we got here, but it is important to understand in this political context that it seems already that Morgan McSweeney and Number 10 have decided that the only election campaign they can feasibly run in 2028, 2029 is suck it up, progressives. You've got to rally around Labour. Otherwise, you're going to get Nigel Farage as Prime Minister. They're not going to have anything else. I mean, the economy might come good. Who knows? There might be a miracle. But essentially, they have now already decided it's the Emmanuel Macron's first into second term Republican front offer, just saying you have to do this. And there are all sorts of reasons why it's not going to work, or why I don't think it will work as well as they hope. First of all, as you've said, there can be lots and lots of people who just think, I can no longer see enough of a difference between what Keir Starmer's Labour Party is offering and what I would get from the Tories or Reform to make me inspired enough to make that to the bulwark against fascism. I think they'd be wrong, but I can see why people might end up in that position. I think also we'll have the problem that if other parties are doing so well in the polls that in first past the post, there's loads and loads of constituencies where you've got a bunch of parties on around 20, between 15 and 25. It won't be clear, it won't be obvious which candidate you vote for, which is the Stop Farage candidate anyway. So first past the post scrambles everything. And finally, you just have to look at what happened in the US. For Trump's second election, you had a load of people who, I don't know how decisive it was, but there were plenty of them who thought, do you know what? Because of Gaza, because of other progressive causes, I can't bring myself to vote for Kamala Harris, even if it means putting Trump in the White House again. Yeah. And they're just going to be, and very clearly there are going to be a load of people who feel that way in 2028. It's not enough. Labour's not offering those people enough.
There's also a point that Naomi Smith, who's we've had as a guest on this podcast before, from Best for Britain, and Naomi and Best for Britain, I should explain, is a progressive think tank whose one mission is just to stop the right getting into power in Britain, which is a rather good mission considering what they've done to this country. And Naomi says, look, people don't know how to vote tactically. People don't know who's second in their constituency, and they didn't know in the 2019. They most certainly won't now. And it's not as if the Green Party is going to say, you know what, we haven't got a chance of winning this seat, you've got to vote Labour, or vice versa. They're going to say, you've got to vote Green here or Lib Dem there. Politicians never do it. So this character, Morgan McSweeney, might say he wants a popular front, a Republican front, an anti-fascist front, to use very old-fashioned language. But Labour isn't going to say in a load of constituencies, you know what, we're pulling out our candidate here, or don't vote for us here, vote Green, vote SNP, vote Lib Dem, vote Corbyn even. They're not going to do it. No politicians do that.
And let's not let the liberal centre-right off the hook here. I mean, they're just the most cowardly bunch of people in the history of politics. I mean, we know, I suppose, okay, first of all, in fairness to the sort of Dominic Greaves and the Rory Stewarts and the old Tory left, for want of a better term, a lot of them were purged by Boris Johnson in 2019. They did stand up to their own party on Brexit, and they were cut off at the knees for that. So they didn't do nothing, but collectively, what used to be the centre right of the Conservative Party, it seems to me, will be about as effective at stopping a Farage onslaught on British politics, and have been about as effective in that as the Never Trumper Lincoln Project Republicans have been at stopping Trump, which is not at all. and I see no evidence that. Certainly, I would not bet the future of British liberal democracy on the courage of the soft right of the Conservative Party.
They're pathetic, actually. They're absolute disgrace. They're, at least the Never Trumpers. I know Never Trumpers like David Frum and Anne Applebaum. I really like them. I admire them. There are lots of journalists in America who suffer big hits to their reputation, big hits to their.
It could be physically dangerous. I mean, these MAGA people will come after you.
Yeah, exactly. They even put their bodies on the line. It's a
risk-free proposition.
Who in the fucking Tory press is standing up to Farage? Two people. Fraser Nelson, my old editor of The Spectator, not the current editor of The Spectator, incidentally, who's Michael Gove. And sometimes, on a good day, Danny Finkelstein. That is it. There is racism running riot on the right of British politics. There's Elon Musk beaming himself into Trafalgar Square, or into Parliament Square, forgive me, saying there should be violence on the streets. Their party is being torn to shreds. No one in conservative journalism, apart from Fraser Nelson, frankly. You pulled a face when I mentioned Danny Finkelstein, so we'll leave it with just Fraser Nelson, who I love dearly, but Fraser Nelson is not enough. It really isn't enough. Talking about the 1930s, and I'm sorry to be melodramatic, it is a sign how people will go along.
Sorry, you mentioned me pulling a face. I like Danny Finkelstein. I think he's a very good writer, and I always read him, and I find him very interesting. And I wouldn't want to malign him on the podcast, but I am waiting still for the piece that he writes that really articulates how dangerous what is happening in the right of British politics actually is, because he's very capable of understanding the consequences of what is going on, the consequences of what Robert Jenrick is doing, within Kemi Badenoch Conservative Party. And unless I've missed it, he has not unleashed the full force of his rhetorical power on that proposition in the way that, actually, to their credit, people on the centre left of the Labour Party did against Corbyn, and they were not thanked for it, and it was quite unpleasant for a lot of them. But they understood, they had a strong position, and they risked tearing their own side apart. They participated in that civil war for what they felt was the soul of their movement. And I have yet to see certain people on the sort of liberal centre right of the Conservative Party do the equivalent thing, and I think that's a shame. I'm finding it a little bit frustrating. But I do also think it's worth zooming out a little bit to understand sort of maybe you can't entirely strip out just sort of human motivation, tribal allegiance, other incentives, cliques, whatever it is that drives certain people to take whatever positions they do, and none of us is necessarily immune to that. But I do think also, and now I'm going to do a long sort of brain burp of a thought that I haven't actually worked through yet, but it feels to me we are still playing through the consequences of 1989, 1991, the end of the Cold War, the removal from the table of Marxist left politics with a massive state sponsor in the Soviet Union that was a substantial geopolitical sort of anchor in the ideological debate, and the post-Cold War climate in the 90s, where political liberty and freedom and democracy, which was the dissident cause against the Soviet Union, fused with economic liberalism and the idea that market freedom was also the same moral cause. And you ended up with, and it's a term that gets abused and overused, but it does refer to something useful, so it's a good enough shorthand, the neoliberal project. That meant that by the time you get to the turn of the millennium, it's quite hard to disentangle the proposition that is we should have free markets and everything, and political freedom as a democratic impulse. And post-financial crisis, we never really disaggregated those things. And I think that really scrambled a lot of people's moral and ideological compasses, because we really need to distinguish between those things now.
Let's look at the scrambling then. Let's treat people who thinking of voting Green, thinking of voting whatever, don't care if they let Farage in, say the real problem's the Labour Party, or the Labour Party should just set aside.
I think it's pretty unfair to say they
bankrupt.
don't care. Obviously, they really don't want for.
Okay,
I mean,
fair enough.
I think they would. I think you can get to a place where you think the thing that I care about is the bad people winning, and I don't want to participate in that. And I think see Labour is now part of the bad movement or bad party.
Okay.
It's complicated, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to diss them in any way at all. I didn't mean to. Bad choice of words on my part. Let's look why they might think that with the Labour Party. I mean, you wrote. I mean, Keir Starmer has gone from winning a landslide election not so long ago, summer of 2024, I mean, barely 18 months ago, not even 18 months ago, indeed, to being the most unpopular Prime Minister ever. Absolutely worse than Liz Truss, worse than Boris Johnson, worse than Lord North, who knows. Do you understand why that is, and why, in particular, people who might, as late as the summer of 2024, have given him a hearing, are now just completely given up on him?
It's such a good question, because the short answer, actually, Nick, is no. I really don't, actually. I mean, I could rationalize all sorts of explanations. I mean, I understand what's happened, and I could list things the government's got wrong, whether from the winter fuel through to pissing off farmers, inheritance tax, not fulfilling the promise of change. Look, we could all come up with reasons why this government's disappointed, to the left and to the right, but it seems to me, and this is, I should almost kind of recuse myself from the entire conversation, and maybe the entire business of political commentary, because it seems to me that underneath it all, sort of self-evidently, Keir Starmer is a man of some decency, would be a loyal public servant who's doing this, who wants to be Prime Minister because, yes, he's ambitious, but I think because he is driven by some kind of spirit of public service. And yes, I've written that he's got his sort of directionless and malleable convictions, and I think he's terribly lost in all sorts of ways. But I don't think he's a wicked, evil man who has seized power with a view to vandalizing liberal democracy. And I don't think he's in the same category at all of, he's not Trump, he's not Putin, he's not even Liz Truss, who's sort of shallow and egomaniac and, it is surprising to me, even when you factor in all the headwinds from an aggressive, hostile media that never even gave Labour the benefit of the doubt as having a mandate to govern at all from day one. Even then, the way in which Starmer seems to have become this repository for anger and frustration with everything that isn't working about British politics in the third decade of the 21st century actually surprises me slightly.
You are listening to Lowdown with me, Nick Cohen. Our guest is Rafael Behr, and we're talking about the crisis on the centre-left of British, American and European politics. Okay, Raf, you say you don't understand. I don't fully understand either. I find it a bit weird because, unlike Liz Truss, it's not even though he has an obviously insane ideological project, as Liz Truss did. But we are where we are, and you talk to Labour politicians, to cabinet ministers the whole time. Are we now at the stage where you say, well, he's just got to go? I mean, it might be wrong. It might be to do with social media. It might be to do with lies circulating as truth and people inventing stories about crime being out of control and migration when it's falling, migration being out of control when that's falling. Might be all of that. But to go back to my original point, we have now a historic duty to stop Nigel Farage. Yeah? He's already wrecked the country once with Brexit. We're not going to let him do it again. And if that means getting rid of Keir Starmer, well, okay, sorry, Keir, but you've got to go.
The short answer to the question is yes, very clearly there is something nearing consensus within the Parliamentary Labour Party, including on the front benches, that they should not fight a general election with Keir Starmer as their candidate to be Prime Minister. I would say with some confidence that right now, no one in the cabinet believes that Keir Starmer should be their candidate in the next general election. Maybe with the exception of Rachel Reeves, I don't know. I have no idea what the Chancellor thinks about this. But it is then because the data show first, the data show you don't come back in polling terms from the place that he's gone to. So if you're that far out in the desert with no food and no water, there's no point in saying I know the way back. You're not going to make it, and that is a hard fact. But also, and this is connected to why he's failed, I think, so badly. There's an old adage that I'm sure you and I have both quoted at some stage in columns, which is, I think, Reagan saying, if you're explaining, you're losing, right? That, what you're doing, the policy should speak for itself, or the candidate should just have sufficient weight and heft. The project should be clear enough that you don't need to say, oh no, what I meant to do was this, or actually the reason I'm doing is that. Once you're in that position, you're on the back foot. And interestingly, I think that's not really true anymore. Actually, I think you have to be explaining all the time. There's such a didactic, sort of evangelical, secular evangelical part of politics in this age. That means to have a prime minister who is so close, so emotionally unavailable, I mean, almost passively aggressively unavailable to the country, who seems to think that he'll do his talking on the pitch and by their good works will you know them, that there's just no sense at all of what any of this is about. And it's so clear to everyone in the Labour Party that Starmer simply does not have that capability. He will never, ever be able to do that, because that's not the man he is. And that's a massive problem. And I'll stop talking in a second, but just the final point here is, then the question we can maybe talk about this is, if in an ideal world, if you could coordinate it, let's say somehow you could just get together the entire parliamentary Labour Party and say, what would be the optimal way to effect this transition? It would probably be recognizing that you definitely don't want to do what the Tories did, which is change leader like 2 or 3 times in the course of a parliament, looking absolutely safe. So you only get one shot. And if you assume that you're going to get a better candidate in, and therefore you will get some kind of polling bounce and some kind of second audition with the country, you probably want to do that a little bit closer to a general election, because there's just going to be loads more shit to soak up in the years. You might as well let Starmer and Reeves be the shit sponge for a bit longer. But of course, you can't engineer any of these things. So you end up in a sort of terrible trying to put the bell on the cat situation, which Labour have been in before and cocks it up every time.
Yeah, that's reassuring words there from the Guardian's chief political columnist. Right then, Raf. Okay, politicians, political journalists, always fight the last war. Are there going to be lessons, possibly even wrong lessons, learned from the failure to date of this government? Because it strikes me one reason why there is no story to tell is it didn't think about governing. It bound itself with promises to, for God's sake, don't mention the EU. Not only can we not go back into the EU, we can't rejoin the single market or the customs union or anything apart from some silly youth mobility scheme. Not silly for young people, I'm sorry, but it's trivial in comparison to the stakes of what we need for our economy. It ruled all that out. It ruled out all the major tax rises. So it's had to hammer business, and apparently is going to hammer all kinds of little incremental things to make the books balance. It didn't. In other words, do you think that going forward, centre-left politicians, centre-right politicians say we absolutely mustn't make the mistake that Labour made in 2024, that Keir Starmer made, of believing that that's what you need to do to win? You can't govern if you tie yourself down the way that Starmer and Morgan McSweeney did.
I think you've raised the central and most interesting question in all of this there, because actually, I mean, you talk about fighting the old wars. 2024 was atoning for 1992. I mean, a whole generation ago, and also slightly trying to refight 1997 in a totally different environment. So they literally went through the retro playbook and did all that. And okay, it worked in terms of maximizing the efficiency of the vote. But as you say, for the reasons that you describe, with a mandate to do nothing of substance. And I mean, as an aside here, was that strategy chosen because the people devising the campaign, and again, I name check Morgan McSweeney here, sort of knew that Starmer couldn't sell anything bigger? That, what's the counterfactual? They go into a campaign and go, you know what, this country is in the absolute toilet. And part of the reason is because we don't fund public services properly. We accepted bullshit fiscal projections by the Tories and massive tax cuts, which they just tried to bribe people with their own money, and it didn't even work. And as a result, we're not going to get a decent health service. And Brexit was an absolutely terrible idea, and we need to completely reimagine that. Now, let's say you did that and you had how many fewer MPs? I know you could probably drop 60, 80. You'd still have a majority and a mandate. Now, we don't know. We don't have that counterfactual. But also what we do know is in order to fight that campaign, you would have needed someone who could sell that and make that argument in a way that, for reasons I've said earlier, we know Keir Starmer can't. And Morgan and others knew that. They were looking at Keir Starmer going, dude, like, I'd love to maybe fight a campaign saying, you know what, we're going to raise income tax and rejoin the single market. But mate, you are not going to be able to sell that in a debate. So how about we just fight a small target strategy? You crawl on the floor with a Ming vase, like, you know, wrapped in sort of bubble wrap, and just get us over the line. So, you know, there, I think, you know, I think some of us, a mea culpa here. I think I underestimated the extent to which Keir Starmer, we were all being insulated from how bad Keir Starmer actually was at campaigning during that campaign. I mean, it was kind of obvious, but it's worth flagging. But interestingly, in terms of getting to the nub of your question, what would the lesson actually be now, given that the situation is so incredibly difficult? So it's not just a question of like, well, wouldn't it be nice if you had permission to raise income tax? I mean, people are feeling quite highly taxed. People don't have much money in their pocket. It's not going to be popular to say, you know, you and I do not want a smaller paycheck at the end of the month. We want well-funded public services, but there's some of the structural problems facing this country, the lack of growth, the fact that people feel, you know, that are feeling the pinch, the fact that actually there are a lot of people economically inactive and we're subsidizing them in ways that, you know, they might deserve money and support, but it's costing a lot of money. The debt servicing is costing a lot of money. All these arguments that Rachel Reeves brings are true. And the centre left, or even the radical left, who just say, well, we can just pick the pockets of a load of billionaires, don't actually have a coherent theory of how to make things better that is as compelling and easily understood as the radical right one, which is it's all the fault of the foreigners. And if we just got rid of them, everything would be better.
Do they have a programme? I have long been not critic of the radical left in this sense, but saying the radical left's great problem after the death of socialism was they never had an economic programme. They never had, they could, I mean, even now I read people who are far cleverer than me, brilliant radical left economists like Adam Tooze or Thomas Piketty, and they are superb. They are absolutely, it is a pleasure to read and listen to them in education. But I just imagine them coming into a radical government is elected anywhere in Europe. And it's interesting, it's very hard to imagine a radical left government being elected anywhere in Europe or in Britain. Imagine it happens. And the Prime Minister and Chancellor and Finance Minister call them and they say, Adam, Thomas, what should we do? And beyond taxing the rich, they don't have a programme. There isn't a radical left economic programme to the left of social democracy, which I think is one reason why they've all gone off down supporting Palestine or identity politics, because they don't have the old programme that socialism gave them, however falsely in many cases. But can you say the same is true now of the centre-left? Because they don't really have a programme beyond taxing capitalism. And it seems, looking at Rachel Reeves, they don't really know how to make capitalism grow either.
Well, that last bit is key. I mean, on the radical left stuff, look, I mean, there are people who stop telling you about MMM, you know, this sort of radical monetary theory, and that there are all sorts of things you could do to defy the bond markets that actually mean that you can just borrow more. And there are, but I'm not disagreeing with you. I think a sort of a post-Marxist understanding of political economy that really gives you a proposition that a program that you could implement starting tomorrow. Yeah, I also search in vain for such a thing. And with the centre left, I think the problem is subtly different, because at least with the radical left or the extreme left, you could just say, well, we just this, and you see this written, you say, well, we'd have a revolution and we'd just pull everything down. So the problem is all the institutions, all the everything, you just sound like the right. And you say the real reason is, and then just you name any kind of radical notion of nationalize the press, you know, whatever. I mean, you just sort of is whatever the left equivalent of, put it all in crypto would be. You can just fancify something to that effect on the left. But with the center left, precisely because it is committed, Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, and others are committed to a defensive project of working within the institutional framework that we already have. They are limited to a kind of incrementalism, and set within that is, because of the nature of Britain's fiscal situation and partly the legacy of Liz Truss, but other things as well, as the scale of the debt servicing and other reasons, they are also working a little bit to order from the bond market. And so it's not just that they don't necessarily have a program, it's not even a theory of growth that you could point to, because at least previously, and you saw this in 2010 to 2015 Parliament, when George Osborne was doing austerity for the liberal right, there was an orthodox Keynesian counter to that, which is actually prime the pump. You can borrow. If you actually spend a little bit more, you mobilize the state, you're going to get growth faster. And plenty of sensible, and actually that's a terribly loaded word, plenty of centrist, non-radical economists, even conservatives, but Martin Wolf was saying this, like, this was not the extreme program. Actually,
and lest we forget, Raf, let us not let Osborne off the hook here. They could have borrowed at the lowest level of interest since the Neolithic.
Yeah, exactly.
You could borrow for no interest at all, effectively.
Yeah, and also let's not forget that actually, to a considerable extent, Ed Balls was advocating that, and the radical left of the Labour Party has slightly rewritten that story as if the Labour Party and Ed Miliband's shadow cabinet just went along with austerity. They definitely didn't. They were definitely arguing for more Keynesian approaches. Anyway, that is no longer available. So, no. I mean, obviously there are people who will say it is, and I part share all the people who say, actually, if you go onto the bonnet of the debt servicing, there's all sorts of, or you unwind QE in a different way. I get all those arguments. But actually, if you speak to anyone who actually trades international debt in the city, they will tell you, no, that's really not a good idea. This is real. The constraints are real. And therefore, there is no center-left theory of growth. They don't have a way. And so, which is why Rachel Reeves has ended up applying sort of COD supply side economics, which might work, deregulate, build more houses, whatever it is, but it's not authentically of the Labour and left tradition. And so she's just committed to pissing people off on her own side every single day of the week.
Raf, you wrote last week a very, very strong column. I mean, it was particularly strong coming from you because, as you said, a bit like me, you've given Keir Starmer the benefit of the doubt. I mean, you wrote a column saying MPs have learned that everything is negotiable with a directionless leader of malleable conviction. One senior Labour figure puts it, Keir is highly unusual as a Prime Minister in giving the impression that whatever he personally thinks is none of your business. Now, you can say, and I absolutely agree, about the constraints of the bond market, constraints of our massive debts, how Rachel Reeves is hemmed in on every side. But a friend of mine, Chris Dillow, who's a brilliant socialist economist, wrote a wonderful piece the other day. He just said, look, these people aren't even competent. Your job as a leader, as a prime minister, is to be able to explain, to give a sense of direction, to tell the country where it's going. And from your account, he can't even explain to his colleagues in the cabinet what he believes in, where he's going, and seems to regard it with some shock that anyone could expect him to explain what he believes in. Is that the case? And seriously, how long can this go on for?
Well, yeah, I think it's, from what I understand, that is the case. Sorry, can I just interject here? I realised I said MMM earlier when I went MMT, modern monetary theory. But okay, there's not. So before I get, because people who believe in this stuff believe in it very strongly, and if they accidentally hear this, and if they hear me misname it, then they will be even more inclined to think that I'm an idiot who doesn't understand it, which might be true, but I do actually know that it's called MMT.
Obviously, Ralph, we don't want to confuse with M and M's, which are small little chocolate sweets.
Or Eminem, who is a tremendous rapper.
Yeah.
So anyway, but your question, look, it seems to me now self-evident that Keir Starmer doesn't have a concept of political economy that is fit for the moment that we are in. And that was already clear before. But first of all, it was plausible that he could outsource that to Rachel Reeves. And in opposition, she talks about securenomics and Bidenomics. And there was a model, something, I mean, okay, it hasn't worked, but and let's not go down the rabbit hole of what Rachel Reeves's plan A was, which clearly, I don't know if this is going out before or after the budget, but okay, we're very much in plan B mode now. But it wouldn't be completely insane for a prime minister to say, okay, my chancellor, whom I trust, has a plan for the economy. But what I think it has emerged, and I think is shocked even people in the cabinet, is that inscrutability that Keir Starmer brought to this derives from, and just not having any kind of macro strategic understanding of the sort of the character of the moment that's facing Britain, and genuinely thinking that with a combination of public service ethos and hardworking ambition to manage a process, he could get into the office of prime minister and sort of and run it like an organization, and that, as they put it, that you were saying, like the what was it, the sort of stability would be the radicalism or something like that. The idea that you could just get that the even keel would reassure markets, reassure investors. You'd get a sort of a growth premium just by not being the Tories and by running things properly. And the absolutely catastrophic misunderstanding there was that, yes, the Tories were terrible. Yes, Liz Truss was a maniac. Yes, Boris Johnson was a rogue and a villain. But also, a lot of the machinery in the system and the way government works is really deeply, deeply dysfunctional. And unless you have a prime minister who comes in and says, these are my priorities, this is what I believe we have to do, these are my red lines in terms of the level, the drasticness of reform I want to implement in public service delivery, or whatever it is, and then and he's prepared to say, and institutionally, I'm going to drive this, I'm going to ride this horse till it's foaming at the mouth hard in these areas, and then the other stuff, I'm going to trust my secretaries of state to just get on with whatever they do, as long as they don't fuck it up too much. And he didn't have any of that either. He didn't have any of those priorities. He had inclinations. So I'm told that things he sort of like actually cares about viscerally, like the climate stuff, he really doesn't want to sack Ed Miliband, although apparently he tried, or Morgan tried. So how committed is he even to that? And he would draw the line at actually leaving the European Convention of Human Rights, because he was a human rights lawyer and he sort of cares about that stuff. But these are actually, I mean, great. I'm kind of reassured about that, but it's not like the rest of what Shabana Mahmood's now doing at the Home Office makes you think that there's a liberal impulse driving migration policy, right? That's clearly not happening. So the global absence of an agenda other than just being prime minister, it's very David Cameron. That sense of like, because I thought I'd be good at it. And although as someone who comes sort of from a liberal left angle, and I said earlier, I want to believe that Keir Starmer is basically a better person than David Cameron. And I probably have all sorts of my own class prejudices for still believing that's true, because I just despise Cameron with every fibre of my being in a way that's probably slightly middle class chip on my shoulder about such a posh excuse.
It's okay. It's okay. Raf, go with it. It's fine.
But I think the failure in that respect, there is something quite Cameronish about it. They're just a complacency about really how hard it would actually be to do some of this stuff. And finally, on this thought, the fact that in some ways that tax pledge that has been so damaging, I don't know if we've discussed this before, is a little bit like Cameron's I'll have a referendum on the EU pledge, like something you say to get through an election campaign, then you actually have to kind of do it. And it's like, yeah, man, I bet that seemed like a good idea on election night when you won. And how much are you regretting that now that you've got to leave the EU / basically your whole tax policy is a raging bin fire?
Such a good comparison. You are listening to The Lowdown with me, Nick Cohen. Our guest is Rafael Behr, columnist, political columnist of The Guardian. Raf, can we wrap up with, can I just talk about stopping Farage? I mean, what it would take to stop Farage? First of all, this is probably a bit left field. How important is it that Donald Trump fails in America? And I'm asking this because Farage is so tied to Trump, echoes him, cheers him on. He and the Tory press, and as we've said many times on this show, it's not the Tory press anymore, really, it's the Reform press, cheering on Trump as he sues the BBC, all the rest of it. If Trump fails, does that lead to a wider contamination of the radical right in Britain and across Europe?
I've thought about this a little bit because I, like you, really want that to be the case, and it can't not have some impact. Let's assume that there is some epic Trump implosion, and there are geopolitical ripples out from that are very substantial. A Labour MP to whom I put this said, don't count on it because, first of all, Farage is very good at politics. He's very slippery. Also, a lot of the people who are supporting Farage, I mean, they don't like Trump, but they're not sitting there scrolling through Blue Sky, getting outraged about every single ICE raid. Do you know what I mean? Like they are living they are in a different place, and they've got their own concerns, rightly enough. And even when you say, look, behold, Nigel Farage serving as Trump's fluffer in all the campaigns, he's just an absolute acolyte of the man. Actually, what all people see is, well, yeah, he's a statesman. This is good. Here he is on the international stage. I mean, it's not like Keir Starmer has expressed any kind of aversion to the domestic destruction of the constitutional republic in the United States represented by Donald Trump's presidency, right? So, as an ethical argument not to make Nigel Farage prime minister, he's friendly with Donald Trump. Well, who isn't? In terms of if you want to get anything done in international politics. I suppose where it might make a difference is if it changes the calculus in terms of, there's sort of wider rebounding in terms of our relationship, with Europe. Does that have a knock-on effect in terms of what happens in France, with Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella chance of becoming president in France? Whether there's, there are so many interlocking bits of this. What does it mean? Will we be in a situation where Ukraine have actually won that war in a way that in some kind of meaningful way? Does it rebound in ways where that means that, as you say, the Tory press in this country is going, well, gosh, yeah, that far right populism stuff's a bit icky. Can we have a sensible centre right Conservative Party back, please? There are too many moving parts.
Yeah.
My instinct, unfortunately, is that actually, and you said this at the beginning, I think it's very astute, that one of the ironies of British politics is how increasingly European it looks. I think that the Farage model, it makes as much sense to look at what Rassemblement National have done in France, what Meloni has done in Italy, and the way they are co-opting their own centre rights that has as something that could be applied in UK politics. That predated Trump and will probably continue after him.
Okay, let's look about what Labour should do, because however much listeners to this might say, I don't even care about the Labour Party anymore, it remains the great beast, the great frog, toad squatting down on the way. And as people say, if you want progressive politics to succeed in Britain, you've got to get the Labour Party on board. Well, maybe that's not true anymore, but it always has been true. Labour, there's two things Labour could do if you assumed Starmer has to go. One thing it could say is, no, essentially Morgan McSweeney is right. He's hardly been proved right so far, I have to say. But anyways, he's essentially right. This is a right-wing country. You've just got to keep moving to the right. So we need to have a right-wing leader of the Labour Party. So we need Shabana Mahmood, or we need Wes Streeting. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do Starmerism, but this time with conviction. This time with a leader who can actually speak to the public. Okay. The other way of looking at it is to say, look, the left has a historic opportunity in Britain. You never have guessed it, but for the first time ever in the history of British democracy, the right has split. It's never happened before. You've got Reform and the Conservatives, and one reason why Labour's got this huge majority on the tiny share of the vote was precisely because the right did split, and it split even more. So if only the centre-left can unite against a split right, we can have another 10 years of centre-left government, 15 years, who knows. So what we need to do is to have a leader who can appeal to people who want to vote for the Greens, who want to vote SNP, who are radical Lib Dems, say, or even if they ever stop stabbing each other in the back, Jeremy Corbyn's lot. So that means Ed Miliband maybe, or another figure from Andy Burnham if he comes back, comes into Westminster politics. Don't poo-poo that the way Westminster correspondents do. Look at how popular he is in Manchester. All of that, Angela Rayner, if she can get back in the cabinet. You start thinking strategically. Strategically, what we need to do is to build a progressive alliance, to use the old cliche, which I still believe in, incidentally. You build a progressive alliance and you say, we're putting a line in the sand, we're not giving our country over to Farage and Genrick and the Telegraph and all these loons. We've already done it. It's been a disaster. Never again.
Yeah, again, intuitively, I feel that when you just look at the cephology of it, that latter scenario seems to be the more secure one for making sure that the next prime minister is not Nigel Farage. That is, can you organize what, crudely speaking, would be the legacy Remain bloc against the legacy Brexit bloc, right? It's basically got Tories and Reform on one side, and then you've got Labour, Lib Dem, Green, and others on the progressive side. And when you add the two shares up in all sorts of constituencies, which one wins? And it's close, and sometimes it changes, but that seems to be the outline of the political contest that is shaping. I worry about this in a couple of ways. First of all, it feels to me a bit too much like surrendering to a model of what political scientists call affective polarization. So you have ideological polarization, which is, I believe that we should nationalize industry. You believe that we should privatize our own parents. And there's economic right, there's economic left, and we believe very, very different things about the world, and those are quite far apart. But actually, affective polarization is more, I wouldn't want my daughter to marry someone who votes the way that you vote. And in that context, the sort of emotional difference, you don't need to have that much difference in ideology. We could believe very, very similar things if you took it took it calmly, but because you voted Leave and I voted Remain, I hate you and everything you stand for, or whatever, and vice versa. And that's where America's gone, right? There is a lot more common ground in terms of the substance of all sorts of policy. And I mean, in this country, until recently, you had consensus on climate change, for example, and we're now moving towards an affective polarization on that, where if you want to be on the right of politics, you now suddenly, for some reason, have to be a climate skeptic, or more to the point, you have to sort of hate green people because you think they're all a bunch of awful woke hippies or whatever. And I don't like a political strategy that leans into that kind of division, because ultimately, for the civic health of the democracy, we do need to be talking across those divides. And I think crucial in that respect is the bit of politics that is that liberal center right. And I would worry, for all sorts of reasons, that in an election where you're sort of leaning into the polarized model, the sort of neo-Remain versus neo-Leave camps, the press being what it is and the political climate being what it is, there are all sorts of people who should be centre-right who would be persuaded that actually the left is more dangerous because of all the terrible wokery and all the things, everything that the right really brilliantly mobilizes in American politics, and that a sort of a Burnham or further left or an Ed Miliband's candidate would really struggle and very possibly fail to give the kind of reassurance that actually a lot of voters in this country need to think it's okay to have a Labour Prime Minister. That's fine,
Because there's a price for allying with Zach Polanski. There's a price for saying Jeremy Corbyn isn't our concern. Jeremy Corbyn, we quite like him because he might give us some votes somewhere.
And it is potentially quite a big price. And unfortunately, and this is again where you need the sort of the evangelical capability. I think whoever the Labour candidate needs to be, yes, they obviously need to do enough to persuade, because it'd be morally the right thing to do, particularly on things like climate and liberal migration policy, to be able to actually win the argument, so that, and on Europe as well, so that people who are currently thinking, I just have to vote Green because I hate the Labour Party that much, would in a general election go, okay, in this constituency, clearly the sensible thing to do is to vote Labour, and I don't mind doing that. They need to be able to do that reassurance. But I would want them also to be able to persuade to use a sort of a personal heuristic, someone like the David Gawks or the Danny Finkelsteins or even the William Haigs of this world, to feel comfortable saying, okay, Farage, that's actually fascism, and therefore we will have a social democrat as prime minister because it's worth it for doing that. And then I don't know who that is, but I don't want to lose sight of that reassurance channel. That's very, very important in this.
That is incidentally how anti-fascism worked in the 1930s. We were looking at 1932 when the communists, who were a huge party in Germany, millions and millions of members, said, the Social Democrats are as bad as the Nazis, we're going to fight the Social Democrats. And their leaders ended up regretting their decision in concentration camps across Europe. But the anti-fascism that followed was, we must detach the moderate conservatives from the extreme right. We must do everything we can. And writers like Orwell absolutely mocked them. They said, "Oh, look at you, red duchesses! You're marching with duchesses. You're singing 'God Save the King.' What kind of socialist are you?" But they said, no, we've just got to stop these fuckers, and to do that, we have to appeal to the moderate right, however distasteful many people might find that. Because, I think what's wrong with the strategy I just suggested with viewing people as blocks is most people do not see themselves as left and right. Most people do not say, I will support the Labour Party if Miliband were leading it, but not if West Streeting were leading it. It doesn't work like that. You've got to build a kind of just a feeling that, okay, these people, they know what they're doing, they've got some good ideas, we can trust them. And I can take your point. But if we accept your point, Raf, isn't the future really rather bleak? There doesn't seem to be a lot of optimism. That you're kind of saying is the centre left can only win with a genius leader. An absolute star, a once in a generation leader like a Barack Obama, or with all his faults and have a history has lambasted him, Tony Blair, a brilliant politician who can reassure the left, reassure the centre, build a national movement behind him. And you know what, Raf? Put an advert on the paper, go on to Gumtree. These people are very, very hard to find.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm afraid I think that's true. I don't know. Who knows? All sorts of things can happen. I am right at this moment. I am quite pessimistic about where things are going. I feel I don't want to depress. Should I maybe just stop talking now? Because
no. Let's face the truth. Go on.
So it is increasingly my view that the evidence that we need historically to track the trajectory of where a lot of the salient politics that we're in at the moment leads is into the abyss. Right? Although we don't know exactly what is in that abyss, we know that nationalism that is on this sort of self-reinforcing, spinning outward ever into increasingly extreme versions of itself leads to really, really dark places. That new radical nationalist movement has set itself up as the alternative to failing second half of the 20th century liberal democratic institutions. The sort of liberal progressive politics that you and I have been talking about and trying to support and come up with interesting ways to admire the problem without coming up with solutions is sort of stuck in a circling of wagons around this historical idea of wasn't liberal democracy great sometime between 1945 and 2010, 2016. Doesn't have, as far as we've said and discussed, a very clear 21st century powerful alternative project, future facing, to say this is a better idea than the extreme nationalism. And the best arguments we have against the extreme nationalism are, for fuck's sake, read some history, look at who these people are, just pay attention to who these people are, what they're saying, who their friends are, what a bunch of nasty, angry, racist, thieving, kleptocratic, psycho, self-serving, venal bastards they actually are. Look at that. Just look at them in the face. Look in the face of the Gorgon, be petrified, and don't vote for it, right? And that argument, which I feel should be incredibly compelling, isn't working, right? And if that's not working, right, we're going to have to go through the abyss. There's no way round the abyss then if that argument doesn't work. We're gonna, and then we'll just have to come out the other side. And I don't know what's in that abyss, but at the moment, I see us just walking towards it, and a load of us going, "Don't go in there, don't go in there, don't go in there," and other people going, "Yeah, don't go in there, don't go in there," and far too many people going, "What abyss? What are you talking about? Like, hey, crypto, whatever." And you know, and I worry. I really, really worry that we're going to have to relearn a lot of really difficult lessons the hard way, because the easier way was to study the history and learn them that way. And we tried that, and guess what? It's not working.
On that note, as we head into the abyss, and let's hope at least some of us come out the other side, on that prescient warning of the old truth that every generation needs to refight the battles of the Enlightenment, I'm going to leave it. Raf, it's been a tour de force. It's been magnificent having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm sorry. That was really, you caught me on a slightly dark day.
Well, no,
I'm worried. I really, you know, we've both got children. It's not. I'm not happy about the state things are in at the moment.
Yeah, well, I was listening to you and I think, oh, okay, how can I come back at RAF? And I'm still thinking that, so I'm afraid. So that's that. Listen, if you like my stuff, you can read me on Substack. Google Nick Cohen Substack, writing for London. Just Google Nick Cohen, it will come up. Some stuff's free to read, some's paid for, but you can back me by subscribing. If you like Rafael Behr, which you certainly should have, liked probably the wrong verb actually. If you appreciate, if you
like me too, you don't have to actively dislike me.
No, I don't know. It just seems a bit like saying he makes nice arguments. It's not quite the right way of saying it. But if you like Rafael Behr, and you should, you can read him at the Guardian. His book, as I said, Politics Survival Guide. I think because it contains psychology as well as modern political history. It's about. Raf talked about us going into the abyss. It's one of the best accounts from the 2010s of how we're heading towards an abyss that I've read. That's still in print. The producer was Andy Hoskin. If you like this program, please give us a 5-star rating. Give us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or YouTube or however you're listening to us. That would be great. It helps spread the word. All it remains for me to do is to thank you for listening. And until next time, goodbye.